I would like to show you Emanuel Lasker's last brilliant game that he played at the age of 66. His opponent, Pirc, neglected development and left his king in the center, which let Lasker carry out a deadly attack and finish the game just in 20 moves. Lasker started with e4, Pirc played the Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6, attacking the pawn, knight c3, defending it, d6 and bishop e2. Lasker opted for the plan with the short castle. e6, short castle, a6, taking under control the b5 square so that the white knights cannot jump on this square, and by doing so black ensured the c7 square for his queen. Now the queen wouldn't be harassed by the white knights on c7, and also black prepared b5, possible b5, followed by the possible fianchetto of the light squared bishop. Lasker develops his dark squared bishop, queen c7, now that the b5 is under black's control, queen c7 is possible, and Lasker starts the pawn storm on the king side, f4. And here comes the first inaccuracy by black. Instead of natural bishop e7, which would have prepared the short castle, black violates the opening principles and makes the second move with already developed piece, knight a5. While his other pieces aren't developed yet and the king is still in the center. And of course Lasker will punish black for this. The idea behind knight a5 is of course to play knight c4, attacking the unguarded bishop and the pawn. And Lasker plays f5, of course, so playing actively in order to punish black for the violation of the opening principles. White is going to capture on e6 and open the f file, after which the white rook would exert very unpleasant pressure on this file. The only downside of f5 is that it weakens the e5 square. However, the knight on c6 could have occupied this square. But now that the knight is on a5, the weakening of the e5 square isn't so dangerous for white. And if the previous move, namely knight a5, was simply a dubious decision, black's next move is a serious mistake. Again, it was necessary to play bishop e7, finishing the development. Instead, black plays in accordance with his plan. Knight c4, making the third move with the same piece, while the other pieces aren't developed and the king is still in the center. However, knight c4 attacked the bishop, and Lasker eliminates this knight. Bishop takes c4, queen takes c4. Now black gets the advantage of two bishops, however it isn't so important because the bishops aren't developed and are very passive. And white opens the f file, f takes e. Now the rook is very strong. And here comes the decisive mistake by black. Instead of bishop takes e6, which would have finally developed the light squared bishop, Pirc captured on e6 with his pawn. And this lets Lasker start a devastating attack with his next move. You can pause the video and try to find it. So the main defender of the king side is the knight. The knight also controls the h5 square, so Lasker sacrifices the exchange in order to eliminate the main defender. Rook takes f6. And after g takes f, we can see another idea. The king side is completely destroyed. It's damaged, seriously damaged. And now that the main defender the only defender of h5 is eliminated, the queen comes into play with great effect. Queen h5 check. The black king has only 3 squares to move. If king d7, then simply queen f7 check. And by playing queen f7 check, white also attacks the f6 pawn. That's why king d8 doesn't work, because of simply queen takes f6 with the double attack, and black is losing the rook. That's why after queen f7 check, black must play bishop e7, but now a very strong move prepared by Lasker. Knight f5, attacking the bishop for the second time, and it turns out that the knight is untouchable, because that would have opened the diagonal and the black queen would have been lost. The only move to defend the bishop is rook e8, but now simple knight takes d6 with a fork. Of course, the bishop cannot capture the knight as it's pinned, and after king takes d6, the rook would be unguarded, and after queen takes e8, black's position is hopeless, the queen side is completely paralyzed, and a deadly rook d1 check is coming. So, after queen h5 check, king d7 doesn't work. What if king e7? In this case, Lasker prepared knight f5 check. So, what to do now? If king d7, then simply queen f7 check, king c6, knight d4 check. The king is forced to move on b6, right under the discovered attack, and after knight b3 check, king c6, simply knight a5 checkmate. That's why after knight f5 check, black must capture the knight. But now the pawn moved from e6, and on e6 the pawn played a very important role. It controls the d5 square, and now that the pawn is distracted from e6, the knight jumps on d5 with great effect and with tempo. Check. And after king d8, bishop b6 check, black is simply checkmated. After king d7, queen f7 check, king c6, queen c7 check, king b5, a4 check, queen takes a4, and white doesn't even capture the queen, but simply checkmates in two moves. That's why after queen h5 check, Pirc played king d8. However, still very strong queen f7 followed, with a terrible threat. Queen takes f6, check, and a double attack, and the rook would be lost in this case. However, the only defense of f6, namely bishop e7, doesn't work because of the same strong move, knight f5, attacking the bishop, threatening checkmate, and the knight again is untouchable for the same reason. White would simply capture the queen. And after queen c7, defending the bishop, simply knight a4, threatening deadly bishop b6 with a pin, winning the queen. And if rook f8, for example, attacking the queen, then simply queen takes h7, king e8, moving away from d8 so that bishop b6 doesn't pin the queen. However, still bishop b6, the only move is queen d7 in order to keep defending the bishop, but now checkmate in 3 moves would have followed in this case. Very beautiful checkmate. That's why after queen f7, as the natural looking bishop e7 doesn't work, Pirc played bishop d7, leaving the f6 pawn unguarded. However, Pirc prepared a very interesting variation. After Lasker captured on f6 and captured the rook, Pirc prepared bishop h6 with a discovered attack on the white queen and also attacking the bishop, which is unguarded. In case Lasker captured on a8, that would have been a mistake because Pirc in this case would have captured on e3 with check, and after the king moves, the knight on d4 would have fallen. Bishop takes d4. White, of course, is still much better. However, black could have continued the resistance. That's why, after bishop h6, before capturing the rook, as the knight would have been lost anyways after bishop takes e3 and bishop takes d4, Lasker sacrifices this knight in order to win a pawn, and after knight takes e6, we can see that besides winning a pawn, he also got control over the d5 square, because the pawn on e6 controls the d5 square, and now the white knight, now that the pawn disappeared from e6, would get a chance to jump on d5 with great effect. So, after knight takes e6, of course, black cannot capture the knight with the bishop because of simple queen takes h7 check, followed by queen takes h6, and white would simply be a piece up, let alone 3 pawns up. That's why, after knight takes e6 check, Pirc captured with the queen. And only now, Lasker captures the rook. And after bishop takes e3 check, king h1, it turns out that white is an exchange and 2 pawns up. Besides that, black doesn't have any compensation, and a terrible knight d5 check comes with great effect. And the king is still unsafe. So white's attack would continue. That's why after king h1, Pirc simply resigned. And now I recommend watching how Fischer sacrificed a pawn 2 pieces and the exchange in order to carry out a devastating attack on his opponent's king in the center. But first, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.